The cost of living continues to increase for South Africans, with the consumer inflation rate reaching a new 13-year high. Data from Stats SA shows consumer inflation has continued on an upward trajectory, rising to an annual 7.8% in July, up from 7.4% the previous month. The main contributors were food, non-alcoholic beverages, as well as electricity and transport. Mervyn Abrahams is the program coordinator, Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity, and he joins us for this discussion. Mervyn, good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning to all your viewers.
Thanks, Mervyn. I hope that this connection holds. It's not too good, but if anything, we'll fix it up and rather do it over the phone if we need to. But let's try at this connection now. Inflation, it's accelerating at an alarming rate. It really is. I mean, just these 3 months, it went from 6.5% to 7.4%, and now at an over 13-year high of 7.8% in 3 consecutive months. I mean, food is really at the center of the headache, one could say, confronting households, particularly in South Africa, given the dynamic of unemployment and inequality. What is this doing to the people of South Africa and the impact of households?
So, Leanne, it is absolutely correct. So, South African consumer is under immense financial stress. What we have seen is, in fact, households beginning to cut back on the amount of food they eat. They have already cut back on the quality of the food they eat, because food with less nutrition tends to be cheaper. And what we are seeing is that, in fact, if we're looking at a national minimum wage, so yesterday's shutdown, if we look at a national minimum wage, which is about 4,000 per month, then about 58% of that wage will now be spent just on transport and on electricity for a worker, leaving 1,709 rand to purchase food, to pay rent, to get children to school, etc. So it really is difficult, because our wage levels and our household incomes are so low that we do not have the savings to buffer us in a time of global financial spikes.
Yeah, and this is, you know, the heart of it all. It's a double-edged sword in a way. I mean, you look at what some of the economists are saying, that food price inflation is stabilizing, and that's kind of at least the little bit of glimmer of hope. What is attributed to that, and what are we seeing it in our baskets? I mean, are we getting the benefits of this, or not really? It's just still sitting at that very high cost, not necessarily ever coming down.
Yes, Leanne. So we have also seen a level of stability returning to food prices. We have seen over the last 2 months, for instance, that the month-on-month increase or inflation increase on our basket of food has fallen. So, for instance, in July, it was 1.3%. Now in August, it is 0.6%. And the month before that, it had also fallen from the previous month. So that indicates that there is a level of stability returning to food prices, and that's connected to global food prices, commodity prices coming down, and global fuel prices coming down. But of course, this is at a very high level. So, for instance, I mean, cooking oil has increased by 136 rand. So we don't ever see cooking oil coming back to what it was in January. You know, so that's the difficulty, is that consumers will still have to negotiate very high prices relative to their levels of income. And that's where the difficulty is.
Yeah, it is. It's insane. And I mean, these are things that we use everywhere and on a daily basis, and they're becoming unaffordable. I mean, the price of petrol, obviously transport was the one issue that really stood out, and we saw the petrol price increasing astronomically, and also the talk that we may need to figure out how to recalculate that fuel price. This is a conversation that's been going on for a while. Let's talk about the fuel price.
Yes, so our fuel, of course, the cost of fuel in South Africa is high in relation to, for instance, our neighboring countries. And it's largely so because of the tariffs and the different taxes that is being put on fuel. For instance, the road accident fund and all these other taxes. And so there is an argument to be made to restructure the cost, and so to bring down the cost of petrol, particularly for businesses, because fuel is a major input cost into the production of almost all goods and services. When we think of agriculture, then, for instance, on the tractors on the farm requires fuel. Carting the vegetables from the farm gate to the retailer, that all requires fuel. So fuel is a major input. So if you can make fuel cheaper, then likely you should be able to bring down food prices. And so that is part of the argument. And one of the ways to do that also is to talk around our strategic reserves. Where is the strategic reserves of fuel that could be put onto the market at a time when food prices are high in order to push down the fuel price locally? That too is an area that we think government should have a discussion on.
Yeah, that's a very big discussion point, I think, and people are calling for that urgently because that could help a bit. I want to talk about we mentioned it a bit earlier about food, and you also mentioned in your answer now that it could help stabilizing or bringing down food prices with stabilizing the oil price. What explains the rising price in food items generally? I mean, if we look at bread and meat in particular, how do we explain this? Fuel is one issue, but how do we explain bread, meat, all of those things?
So the price of food, Leanne, is quite complex. It involves a number of different factors. So just as an example, for instance, because the farmer requires rain, and of course climate is a big player in the production of basic food, particularly vegetables, animals, etc. So when, for instance, we have unseasonal rain in Limpopo, as an example, then we see the price of tomatoes spike all around the country, because most of our tomatoes are grown in Limpopo, which means that we are at risk to climate change in Limpopo for tomatoes, and that is true about a lot of our other kinds of foods that are grown in massively to another part of the country. And that's why fuel, it plays such an important role. But climate also plays a role, because when we do see, for instance, droughts, when we do see too much rain, that also has an impact. And then, of course, in South Africa, we are also importing food from elsewhere. So, for instance, we are importing wheat from the Ukraine-Russia area, for instance, because we do not produce enough wheat for South Africans. And so we are, so all those kind of global factors begin to play on our local market and our local prices.
Yeah. Your view is that South Africa really doesn't have a food insecurity problem, and the country can even import more food, but it's households that just don't have food. I mean, talk about this irony and the direct link between going without when there is an abundance out there, but people just don't have the money to buy, and link this to social instability.
Yes, Leanne. So South Africa is food secure at a national level. We produce and we import enough food for all that could reasonably feed all South Africans. There is no problem with that. When we go into our stores are full of food. It's there. The issue is at household level, because South Africans are net buyers of food. We buy our food and we access our food through the supermarket. And in order to get access to that food in the supermarket requires that we have enough money in our pocket to get that. And so our levels of household income determines our access to food at a household level. And because our wages are so low, because our social grants are so low, therefore, we cannot access the sufficient amount of food we need. And correctly, as you said, there is a direct link between household food insecurity and social instability. We've seen it in Haiti, we have seen it in July last year in KwaZulu-Natal, we have seen it in the Arab Spring. When people are hungry, they have nothing to lose, and that is where social instability reach peak points in a society.
Exactly, and we've been seeing that. We also see things like yesterday, a national shutdown where, South Africans come to the streets to say they just can't afford to carry on this way. If we look at a few things that perhaps government can do, I mean, why does government, for instance, not cap certain items, such as bread, to regulate these basic foods, not to go over a certain price, instead of letting them just run away?
Yes, there are two ways in which government can help with pricing. The first, of course, is to regulate prices, as you've said, to with industry begin to set a level at which, for instance, our very basic foods like maize meal and rice and bread, a level at which it cannot go above. Or if it does have to go above that level, that government can begin to subsidize it. Or secondly, government can create strategic reserves, buy up wheat and maize, etc., at when it is low, and then release it onto the market when we see price spikes. So those are definitely areas that government can look at and government should look at, because we should be preparing for more such risks in the future to food prices. We are in an upward inflationary trajectory, and the risk is that we can see this kind of price increases again coming about in about 6 or 7 months, depending on if there's war in which part of the world. So it definitely is something that government needs to think about very, very seriously. But really, Leanne, at the heart, it is about wages and income, like the union said yesterday, because in reality, our wages have actually gone lower in real terms over the last 5 years, because our basic essentials are increasing way above CPI, while our wage increases are linked to CPI. So every year we are in fact getting a little bit poorer and poorer.
Yeah, indeed we are. That goes without saying. We can visibly see that this is happening. I mean, the threat to the middle class is massive, and I think, I mean, we're not even talking about the poorest of the poor, who, I'm not sure how they're getting through every day, but a shrinking middle class is something that we're seeing as well, and that's a dangerous space to be in. I'm reading something from the Competition Commission as well that are talking to the price of things like bread and oil, particularly. Those are the big ones. We've also referred to that here, but they're also saying that yes, external circumstances like what's happening in the Ukraine are reasons that we're seeing things increasing like this exponentially, but when things start settling, we never see them coming down, and that for me is something I see all the time. Does this not give us even further argument to say, no, we need to find a place to cap this, and things must come down. Just as they go up, they should come down if things are looking better.
Exactly, we should be, and Leanne, that baffles us as much as it baffles you. That we see, there is an argument that when fuel prices increase, then food prices increase. And we can see the logic to it, because it is a major input cost, and therefore the price will change. But then when fuel prices drop, we do not see exactly the same. And so we can be lucky, actually, Leanne, that the Competition Commission does keep a very good eye on price increases. They have already fined opportunistic retailers. And we hope that they will continue to do that, because sometimes it is purely a factor of profit margins that are driving these and not the real value of the goods that we are receiving.
All right, Mervyn, we've got to leave it there, unfortunately, as we head into 7 o'clock. Thanks for your time. Thanks for explaining a few things to us and also offering one or two things that perhaps can be implemented to mitigate the effects of the high price of absolutely everything at the moment. Mervyn Abrahams is the program coordinator at Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity. Inflation, 13-year high, and the effect on South African households.